All right, everybody. So in this video, I'm answering some popular questions that I get. How to build a better body, how to develop your physique. What does the research actually say? Been getting many questions about this, so I'm happy to answer. Answered this in great detail in my book, The Abel Approach. And that book you see behind me there, Hard Gainer Solution, hardgainersolution.com, both the book and the course, answers all these questions as well, or puts the research actually into application. But we're going to look at what the research actually says. A little background here for those my new fans who don't know me too much. For most of the 90s and early 2000s, I was known as the trainer of champions, a nickname that the late Robert Kennedy, publisher of Muscle Mag, gave me. I made hundreds and hundreds of bodybuilding champions, and I left that world because of the performance enhancing drugs got insane. But I also was able to develop a world-class physique of my own. We'll post up a couple of pictures of me from that era right there, so you can see I actually walked the talk, and I was a featured guest poser at a lot of places. And I was a go-to guy for lectures and articles, have my own column in magazines, etc. So I got the background and the education, just a little outline. But how to build a better physique, instead of taking my word for it, what does the research actually say? So we're going to look at this study from the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2016. So as you can see, relatively recent. So here's the title of that research article. Neither load nor systemic hormones determine resistance training mediated hypertrophy or strength gains in resistance trained young men. So that's a little bit academic. Break it down for you. What they're saying there is it's not about how much weight is on the bar that determines physique development and strength in this particular study and meta-analysis. Now, we're going to focus specifically on physique development and less about strength, though not the same thing, although the message gets confused and convoluted that they are the same thing, and that's the myth that we are going to address in this particular video. So that's what we want to do. We want to look at what the research says about building a physique. So here's a quote from that study. Contradicting the dogma, we report that the relative load lifted per repetition does not determine skeletal muscle hypertrophy or, for the most part, strength development. So very, very important. Furthermore, let's post this quote up there from the study. In line with our previous work, acute post-exercise systemic hormonal changes were unrelated to strength and hypertrophic gains. So let's think about what that says about your branched chain amino acid, your post-workout window of opportunity, your post-workout whey, your GH boosters, testosterone boosters, and all the rest. I will address that mythology in a future video. For now, I'm focused on what about the training, what is the best way to train for physique development. So that's what we're addressing in this particular study. I will come back and address the other mythologies that this research addresses in another video. I don't want to keep it too long. But in this following quote, they lay out the typical marketing dogma hype in the fitness industry. When they say, we'll post this up, current recommendations are that resistance training with relatively heavy at 70 to 85% or greater 1 repetition max loads, load referred to the amount of weight used per repetition, is a prerequisite for maximizing resistance training induced hypertrophy. In other words, the dogma that exists is what I always say, the myth is train for strength and development will come, is one of the biggest myths in the fitness bodybuilding industry. If that were true, then all the powerlifters would have better physiques than all the bodybuilders. And as we see, of course, that isn't true. Go to a natural, raw powerlifting event, and you're not going to see a whole lot of great balanced muscle mass physiques there. So let's go to the next quote here. As they say, that the previous quote was about the existing dogma. Their quote is, notably, this conclusion is at odds with existing data determined from long-term training studies. Now, I want to throw that quote up there and note the term long-term. long-term emphasis. To that I say amen. So in other words, the myth and the dogma remain in spite of research evidence that disproves it. And let's look at some more of that research. Also from the Journal of Applied Physiology, but from 2012, a few years earlier, we see a quote from that particular study. The study is named Resistance Exercise Load Does Not Determine Training-Mediated Hypertrophic Gains in Young Men, from 2012. And what we see there is a quote from that study. In summary, we report that similar resistance training induced muscle hypertrophy can result from lifting loads to failure with higher 80% of 1RM and lower 30% of 1RM loads than are currently recommended for novice lifters. The results from our study also suggest additional training volume in the form of more sets may result in greater muscle hypertrophy. Boom. And the reason I'm saying boom there is that's an argument I've been making for decades in my book, The Abel Approach, and the articles I've written, that physique development is more about increasing training volume and surfing the reps curve than it is about how much weight you lift. And as they say here, lower percentage of 1RM down to as low as 30%, which would make the reps really high, like 20 to 25 reps, combined with additional training volume. And then there's this study from the European Journal of Sports Science, muscular adaptations in low versus high load resistance training, a meta-analysis. I'm very fond of meta-analysis because it takes a look at a wide snapshot of the research and see what it has to say. And a quote from that study is, in conclusion, training with loads less than 50% 1RM was found to promote substantial increases in muscle strength and hypertrophy in untrained individuals, but a trend was noted for superiority of heavy loading with respect to these outcome measures. So, in other words, training with lower loads, less weight on the bar, that inner versus outer, internal versus external cue, still promoted substantial increases in muscle strength and hypertrophy. And then they say there was a trend toward the superiority of heavy loading with respect to these outcome measures. What I'm going to say there is what you see is a takeaway that I always say is that train for development and strength will come. So as you go along, training with trying to add more volume, surfing the reps curve from anywhere from 5 to 6 reps all the way up to 20 reps within workouts for body parts, then you'll gain strength, and that's where they come to their conclusion that a trend is noted for superiority of heavy loading with respect to these outcome measures. So it's important to have context when you look at those conclusions. But back to our focus study from 2016, and they say, and I quote, taken together, our data suggest that factors regulating skeletal muscle hypertrophy in response to resistance training include neither load nor systemic hormonal concentration. So what they are doing there is exposing a lot of industry hype and dogma. What this means in layman terms from that quote is that you should understand, one, train for strength and development will come is a myth, as I've been saying for decades, and is proven by my innovation training research, where I point out other research that's involved as well. And then you also want to know another key point made by these researchers in terms of hormonal concentrations having nothing to do with adaptive response that results in better physique development. So here we go back to the study. 12 weeks of supervised higher and lower load per repetition resistance training programs were similarly effective at inducing skeletal muscle hypertrophy in resistance trained participants when resistance training was performed to volitional failure. So what we see here is that whether you're doing high reps with lower weight or low reps with high weight, what they're saying is both result in hypertrophy, but the common denominator there is exertion, as in intensity of effort, what we call maximum voluntary neural activation, not load. So increases in strength were not significantly different between the groups. Boom. Now, of course, I'm all about physique development and aesthetic physique balance, so I'm less concerned with strength gains, but even in this study, even strength gains were made no matter if you were high load, low reps, and low load, high reps. And they did make an exception, which we'll put up here. The exception was the bench press, 1 repetition max, which actually increased to a greater extent in the low repetition group, and that makes sense because the low resistance group, and that makes sense because of neural adaptations and neurological response, especially in novice lifters. Now, conclusion-wise, taken together with previous data, the findings of the present study, along with a recent meta-analysis, do not support the assertion that higher load resistance training is a prerequisite to maximize resistance training induced muscle hypertrophy, especially when lower load exercises are performed to volitional failure. So translation from academic speak is what they're saying is their research, and as well as a meta-analysis of existing research, shows that you don't need to train for strength and development will come. It's not a prerequisite to building muscle. You should save your joints and train in the high repetition ranges. Hence, their research proves one of my ableisms: train for development and strength will come, not the other way around, as the myth that won't die in this industry wants everyone to believe. And notice that they say, let me put that quote up there again, the findings in the present study, along with a recent meta-analysis, do not support the assertion that higher load resistance training is a prerequisite to maximize resistance training muscle growth, especially when lower load exercises are performed to volitional failure. So that especially when proves part of my innovation training hypothesis as laid out in my book, The Abel Approach, and that intensity of effort is the common denominator and more important than load when it comes to muscle development. So training with lighter weights for more sets is going to induce a lot of muscle development, and it will save your joints for the future as well. So here we can look at another study from the Library of Science, and low load, the title of the study, low load, high volume resistance exercise stimulates muscle protein synthesis more than high load, low volume resistant exercise in young men. So in this study, from the Library of Science, the conclusion and the significance, these results suggest that low load, high volume resistance exercise is more effective in inducing acute muscle anabolism than high load, low volume of work matched resistance exercise modes. So once again here, the emphasis that they see is on high volume resistance work, not high load. You see all this, heavy duty training and which camp are you in? 1 set to max or high reps and high volume? There is no camp to be in. Muscle development is all about more volume, as in 20 plus sets per week for a muscle group and surfing the reps curve. But back to the specific research that we started with, again from the Journal of Applied Physiology, 2016. And again, the quote, "The current data, along with previous work, are direct proof that hypertrophy, meaning muscle growth, and strength gains are not a function of the load lifted." So let's read that again. The current data, along with previous work, are direct proof that hypertrophy and strength gains are not a function of the load lifted. We are particularly concerned here with hypertrophy, as in muscle development and muscular physique. So it's not about how much you lift, it's about how you lift it, and it's about the volume of work and surfing the reps curve. So back to their conclusions, and I will post this one up here. Instead, we propose that exercising until volitional failure with adequate volume and load between 30 and 90% 1 repetition max will sufficiently activate muscle motor units, which drives skeletal muscle hypertrophy. Now, the important thing there is what they're talking about: activate muscle motor units between 30 and 90% 1 repetition max. So not only do you need to surf the reps curve, anywhere from low reps, 5 to 6, all the way up to 20 reps, but you also need multiple angles, ranges, and planes of motion for target muscle training, which is all outlined in my book, The Abel Approach. So let's not conclude from this, however, that high reps, lighter weights means easy training and workouts. I've seen that a lot where people equate training with lower loads and higher reps somehow means it's an easier workout. You will find if you do it right, it's a harder workout. If you compare a set of 20 rep squats to failure to a set of 5 or 6 reps of squats, you will see the difference. So whether using lower loads or higher loads, intensity of effort, as in maximum voluntary neural activation, is the common underlying factor and stimuli to adaptive response when it comes to muscle development. And it's really unequivocal. Now let's get back to that research. Following the 12-week intervention, there were similar increases in muscular strength between the two groups. Again, I'm not all that concerned with strength. I'm all about the muscle development. So you can gain strength even by training with lighter loads, but higher intensity. And that's that innervation training precept again. So specifically in the research, they say specifically high resistance and low resistance increase strength with no differences between the groups. So unless you're training for a powerlifting meet where you want to keep the reps low and the loads high for a particular neural response, then you really need to be surfing the curve, the reps curve, as I outlined earlier. And I'll quote them again from the research. It is evident that the current literature supports the use of both low repetition, high load, and high repetition, low load resistance training to induce increases in maximal strength. Our results support the concept that maximal strength increases can be achieved with the use of either low or high loads, so long as there is periodic practice of lifting with heavier loads. That's exactly how my Hard Gainer Solution program, the book you see behind me, is designed. We surf the curve between high loads, low reps, and then the majority of the week with higher reps and lots of volume. I mean lots of volume, training a body part every day. That's how the Hard Gainer Solution program is designed. And here's the thing. I designed and applied the Hard Gainer Solution protocol before this research even became available. So once again, it shows the value of experience and expertise is right, and research often catches up later. But the lesson, those who only know how to chase research are always going to be left behind. The true innovators and the people who are ahead of the game in terms of what can be studied is one thing and what can be initiated is another. Let's get back to the research there, and I quote, "We propose that muscle hypertrophy is fundamentally driven by motor unit activation." Boom, shakalaka, laka, boom, boom. That's what I've been saying. That's the main thrust of my innervation training methodology, is that muscle growth and development is about motor unit activation, ranges and planes of motion of muscle function to enhance fiber recruitment that I've been arguing since the 80s. Yes, it's about surfing the reps curve from low reps and high reps within a specific workout, but it's also about angles and ranges and planes of motion and multiple exercises. So you want to surf the curve, but you want to do different exercises as well. So getting back to the research, and they quote, "Increases in lean body mass as an indirect measure of muscle mass and muscle fiber cross-sectional area, a direct measure of muscle area, occurred in both low resistance and high resistance groups with no differences between the groups." So because both groups shared high intensity of effort as the common denominator. So stop worrying about how much you're lifting and focus more on how you're lifting it. You want to focus more on internal cues and not external cues, like how much weight is on the bar. Give you a couple of examples. Let's consider the example of one of the best physiques of all times that ever lived, the late French bodybuilder Serge Nubret. You can see him in the movie Pumping Iron, where he plays second to Arnold. He was famous for training with lighter weights, higher volume of sets and reps, reps of 20, even higher, and seldom going below 15 reps, and that pumping cadence that I'm so fond of. Also, check out the high reps training in the original Pumping Iron. Go to Netflix. Watch pumping iron. What you're going to see there is you're going to see a lot of pumping and a lot of high reps execution with high intensity. There's great training clips in there that you can learn from that aren't about how much weight is on the bar. Train for development and strength will come. Yes, they're using good weights and they're strong, but they train for development and the strength came later. Therefore, as I argue in many of my books, like the Abel approach, ranges and planes of motion and angles of contraction are about muscle, fiber, recruitment, and activation, key elements of physique development that extend well beyond and way beyond bench, squat, and deadlift. Numbers and deadlift in particular, that exercise is practically useless for physique development and has a high risk, carries a high risk of injury as well. So I'll leave that discussion for another time. But the summation here is that training for strength and training for an aesthetically developed physique are not the same thing. So here again, show a picture of what I used to look like, what I call mass with class, a balanced physique. And I was never about, when I got to that level of development, it was never about how much weight I was lifting. It was all about target training the muscle, or as protege and former fitness model Andy Sinclair puts it, I don't lift weights, I train muscles. And boom, that's what this research is talking about. So when it comes to the research about training for physique development being all about effective muscle fiber activation and recruitment, then this reflects another major Abel principle. The muscles work the weights don't work the muscles. Only when you're competing in something that is expressing limit strength do you focus on the weights working the muscles. For physique development, let me say it again, let me put this on the screen. The muscles work the weights don't work the muscles. It's a fundamental difference in thinking when you go to the gym to work out. This means rather than focusing on how much weight you are lifting, focus your attentions on the muscles that are lifting that weight. For example, I see this all the time. If you are bench pressing in your workout, then decide in advance if you are trying to work your pecs with that exercise or are you trying to see how much weight you can bench. Two different approaches, two different outcomes. If you're about physique development, you can't split down the middle. You have to focus on one or the other. Back to our original research from the Journal of Applied Physiology 2016. Neither load nor systemic hormones determine resistance training mediated hypertrophy or strength gains in resistance trained young men, which means it's not about trying to lift more and more. It's about trying to effectively lift what you're lifting. I'll address the hormonal aspect of their conclusions in the next video or in another video. But if you want to build a better physique, what you need to learn is to surf the reps curve, low reps, high weight, and then medium reps, medium weight, high reps, lower weight, rather than focus on lifting more and more weight as some indicator of progress. For instance, your weights don't need to be going up every week for you to be making progress in physique development. That would be a wrong focus unless you are on some kind of lifting program for a lifting competition. In bodybuilding structured body part programs, it's not about my weights aren't going up. That doesn't matter. It's about mastery of execution and focusing on the muscles work the weights don't work the muscles. So it's about doing that and target training your muscles. It's not about measuring loads. For more on this, if you just want a certain bullet point, how to apply in your workouts to get more out of them, mind-muscle connection, etc., get my free innovation training primer at my scottabelfitness.com website, scottabelfitness.com/primer, and you'll get that for free as well. So again, looking at the research, what we see is the myth that won't die, that keeps on telling us that train for strength and development will come. If that was true, then all the power lifters would have better physiques than all the bodybuilders. It's patently not true. Of course, there is crossover for the genetically gifted. There's some people who are great at both. They're strong with the big lifts and they've got great physiques. That's the exception, not the rule. How strong you can be, and I'll discuss this in another video, is more about tendon length and thickness, what you were more or less born with, and then you can train. If you're born with longer tendons and thinner tendons, then you're not going to be that strong. If you're lanky, you're not going to be that strong because you have to move weight over a greater distance and range of motion. And there's more that I can talk about with this. The lesson being, and the research reinforces, that it's not about how much you lift. You need to surf the reps curve, and if you want to build a great physique, do it with high reps and high intensity of effort, and keep adding volume, somewhere around 20 sets per week per body part, around there. Mind you, of course, you need to have assessments. And of course, all of these factors are written into the Hard Gainer Solution book, and actually have a Hard Gainer Solution course as well, where this stuff is discussed in greater detail. So that's research from 2016, pretty recent, and it's all about the myth that it's not about how much you lift. There's way more to it than that. Surfing the reps curve that they talk about here is one thing, and what I talk about in my book and the Hard Gainer Solution is the way that's organized and structured. Is it's all about angles of contraction as well, different exercises for different effects based on muscle function in all kinds of ranges and planes of motion. So that's it for today. Hope you got the message. I will use this same study to address the next myth that they take down in this study, and that's all about, workout hormonal concentrations that make you bigger, and the lie that keeps perpetuating that myth is in order to sell you useless supplements that you don't need. So stay tuned, and I will address that in a future episode. Hope you got value out of this, and by all means, leave me some comments, and I will see you again next time.